Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
So, a couple months ago, Teresa called and said, Danny's book comes out in mid-July. I'll make an offer you can't refuse, but I'll serve it with sweet tea on the veranda. We'll be... Oh, you already laughed. Can we rewind this? Gee. Okay. We'll be your guest on Tuesday, July 19th, with world-renowned podcaster Ramona Scott as your co-host. So, in typical Jesse James style, biker chick Teresa Duke is a guest. Ramona Scott is co-hosting again, and since Dan's last appearance, he's had another TV appearance, and he's also now a respected government official. So my first question is...
as much respect as they can get.
So whatever happened to overthrowing the man?
Or you got to do it from the inside.
Okay, well, that was my follow-up question. Or is this like a remnant of one of Jesse's plots to set up, your own breakaway republic, and you're the president?
No.
We don't want that to go to Danny's head. We already called, me and Debbie already call him Director Dan and Hollywood Dan, so we can't add the President Dan to the list. Please don't. Please don't.
Okay, so you're not doing really like nasty politics kind of stuff. You have it sounds like a fun job. So let's hear a little bit about.
It can be fun.
Okay. Well, you had the photos of. I think earlier this spring it was like a 4-H. I think it was like a bunch of little kids with the animals. That was. And you were out there inspecting.
Yeah, that was out at the arena. They have an arena where they have barrel racing, rodeos, dances, country singers. A lot of different people go out there, and it was a lot of fun. They've got a pond. We use the Texas Parks and Wildlife, work with them to they deliver catfish and keep the pond stocked, and it gives the kids a chance to catch fish. And they'll usually, Texas Parks and Wildlife will usually supply fishing poles, and kids who've never got to fish can come out and fish and eat hot dogs and all kinds of good stuff.
That's nice.
Okay.
And it's a lot of fun.
No, it looked like the kids and their parents were having a good time, and someone the Marshall, Texas Facebook page that there's an International Country Music Award.
Yeah, I just got that recently. It hadn't started. It'll be the first time they've come to Marshall. They were in a neighboring city. They outgrew the facilities there, and now they're coming to Marshall. And it's people from 22 different nations. They play Texas-style country music, and they love Texas. So whoever wins, they compete against one another, and they get first, second, and third place. And having an award from the state of Texas for country music is just real big for them. And it helps them a lot back home in Europe. And we've got people from Swaziland, people from Austria, Australia, Mexico, and other parts of Central America, and just all over the place. There's one guy who lives, I think he fishes out in the North Sea about 30 miles from the Arctic Circle, and he's also a singer, and he's going to be here. So there's a lot of different people.
Wow. Maybe I have to make a trip up there to Marshall.
You should. Let me know if you're coming. And
I will.
I'll show you the best places to eat.
Wow.
And a lot of history, too.
Yeah.
That's another part. The city is real faint. There's a lot of history, and I don't want to go off on a rant. I sound like a talking brochure now. But there's a lot of history here. Civil rights history. James Farmer was one of the big four in civil rights, and he grew up here. And there's just it just goes deeper and deeper. There's a lot of history here, good and bad history. But I guess every place has a little of both.
Right.
But it's been a lot of fun, just learning and trying to get past some things and help the city, do my best to help the city move forward.
Well, with you at the helm, Dan.
I hope.
I know. We live in the Wild West with TERESA and Dan Duke.
Yes.
Because I finished that book, and oh my gosh, I'm ready to go on a trip.
Yeah. I was telling Danny that before the call, and he did a stand-up job with this book.
Thank you.
It was captivating. Doesn't even really it was captivating. I couldn't put it down.
I read it in one city.
Yeah. It was just I told him before the call, I was like, Danny, this is the best. You really went all out, and this is a really fantastic book.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it.
And I don't compliment my brother that often, y'all. So for me to tell Danny that, it was a good one.
But
it really was.
Over the next hour and 50 minutes, I think if we together, we will find that, Dan and TERESA did create a fuller picture of what was going on in the Wild West.
Yes, absolutely. And what I tripped off of was so much as I read, because I've read all three, and as I was reading, especially in this last one, it started to form a picture of what is going on now in the U.S. When you look back at the history that Dan ran. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like, wow, it's like you can kind of understand what's going on in our country right now. And I don't know if you intended that, Dan, but it really was eye-opening for me, truly.
It was eye-opening for me as well, and it kind of, well, as before I wrote the books, just doing the research, I came to that realization, and I thought, my God, this is amazing. And it didn't happen all at once. It's like piecing a puzzle together, and that was also why I wrote it in three separate books with the help of Teresa on the second one, just to make sure, just to get the story out in those three main steps. So it shows the past, and then his current life and how he faked his death, and then kind of in ways on the third one, it's a lot of it also deals with the aftermath after his time, after he was gone, and how it carried through.
And then also too, before when you go back and you talk about the Knights Templar and the KC, is it the KCG?
The KCG?
Yes.
Yes.
Knights of the Golden Circle.
Right. I mean, like starting back in Europe and, the plans that could have been intended for the New World, and all of that together with, what was going on in the Wild West, and then what happened afterwards. And then it just is like this map of where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. Does that make sense to you?
That does.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Ramona, one of the relevant passages about what was going on in the Wild West, still is with us today, is from, Dan's new book, Secret History of the Wild Wild West, Outlaws, Secret Societies, and the Hidden Agenda of the Elites.
Right.
On page 58, Dan writes, the interactions between Jesse and these men illustrate how politics benefited from the outlaws' careers, and that these outlaws actually served a higher purpose than just riding around robbing people.
Right. And it definitely looks that way.
Yeah, and we could, as we go on throughout the evening, we can get into the founding of Baylor University and presidents.
Yeah. Yeah. What a tangled web we weave.
Yeah.
It is.
Oh,
very.
yeah.
So,
And how they're so good at covering up their tracks.
Yes.
Before we jump too far ahead with talking about, just say our presidents, Truman or Lyndon Johnson.
Yeah.
We've had so many new listeners and YouTube subscribers. We appreciate all their support, but maybe we should review some of Teresa and Dan's basic information about what brought them into being so closely involved with this Jesse James and Wild Wild West recent publication. Dan, do you want to give us a little bit of background about you two, or both of you could give your background and why you're so interested in this late 19th century time period.
Well, it all started with our mother, our late mother, Betty Dorset Duke. She grew up hearing the stories. You know, it was passed down through the family that Jesse faked his death, came to Texas, and married the daughter of a Texas Ranger. And everybody in the family had known it. They would talk about it at family get-togethers and things. And as Mom grew older, she would see the movies or read history books, and all the books and movies said Jesse didn't fake his death, that he died. You know, he got shot in the back of the head. So she was wondering who was right and who was wrong. And it was around the time Teresa and my brother and I were in college. Mom had the time on her hands finally to start researching, and she wanted to prove once and for all which was right, the family story or the history books. And she got all the evidence she could find, and using family photos, forensic photographic analysts at the Texas Department of Public Safety, their headquarters in Austin Police Department, and a group called Visionics, who ended up getting sold out to another company. They're called Identics today, I believe. But they all three groups who had no connection to Mom, and they did it for free, so they weren't paid for results. They verified that our family photos matched historically accepted photos of Jesse and his family, and it just went from there. So that Mom started it off. She proved he didn't die as history had said, and we followed up where she left off when she passed away in 2015, just with the rest of the story. I was never going to publish anything about the treasure stories until after she passed away. I decided I might as well go ahead and do it. So, and that's what started it off again.
Okay. And Mark Olshaker, who co-authors true crime books with profiling pioneer John Douglas, has been a guest with us a couple times, and he covered many of the patterns that lead to people becoming serial killers. Jesse really doesn't apply. That term really doesn't apply to Jesse, but he did have a life of crime. What were some of the events that led to shaping Jesse for a non-traditional lifestyle?
Well, when he came from a family who at the time they were considered a good, decent family. You know, they were pioneers. Their mother raised them right. Their father was a Baptist minister, and he was also a co-founder of William Jewell College in Liberty, Missouri. And then when their father, the story is their father left to minister out in California in the gold fields, and he never came back. The story is he died, was buried in an unmarked grave, and that was the end of him. Few years later, the fighting, this was about 10 years before the official start of the Civil War, fighting started between the free states and slave states. And people from Kansas would ride in and attack people in Missouri, and then they would retaliate in kind, and it was just back and forth for about 10 years. And the fighting was very bloody. At the beginning of the Civil War, Jesse was too young. He was 13 around the beginning. Well, actually a little younger than that. At the beginning, very young boy. Soldiers rode onto the farm. They tied Jesse to a plow and beat him, strapped his mother to a tree and beat her. She was pregnant at the time, and they hung his stepfather until they didn't kill him, but he had brain damage for the rest of his life. But when he got shortly after that, he decided he wanted to get revenge, but nobody would let him ride. He was too young. And around the time of that attack on his farm, he was about the age of 14. But anyway, he went looking for revenge, and he found a group that would let him ride, and that was William Quantrill's group. They were Confederate guerrillas, and that's where he learned how to fight. At the end of the war, and people have said that Quantrill's guerrillas weren't a legitimate part of the Confederacy. They actually were. He had the rank of captain, Captain Quantrill, and but anyway, that's off on another topic. But at the end of the war, they weren't granted amnesty like the rest of the Confederacy, and because of that, they were hunted down. You either turned yourself in, were tried and hung, or they would hunt you down and try to kill you. So they thought if we're going to be branded outlaws, they might as well live up to it. And that's the story, and that actually was part of the case, but there's a lot of secrets to be uncovered still about how he got. I want to know when he became acquainted with Freemasonry, and I think it was during the Civil War, because during the Civil War, Albert Pike, who was a famous Freemason, 33rd degree Freemason, and he's written a lot of amazing books. He was a brigadier general for the Confederacy, and he befriended a lot of the Native American tribes, and they gave him his command was in Arkansas and parts of Oklahoma, and he would just like any general or any soldier back then, they traveled over large areas. Well, they had come into contact with Quantrill's guerrillas, and it could be, there's no facts or written documents that I've found, but it just kind of makes sense if Quantrill's guerrillas were in the same camp with Albert Pike and his men. Jesse may have come into contact with Freemasonry at that age or at that time. So, but there's no facts to back that up. But anyway, to answer your question, yeah, he wasn't a typical outlaw. He wasn't like a killer. Right. John Wesley Hardin's a perfect example of a serial killer. If you know anything about John Wesley Hardin, he shot a man for snoring one time in the saloon, and he would go to saloons and look for fights, and he was good with his gun and killed a lot of men. But whereas Jesse, he avoided towns. Anytime he was riding, he would ride around a town. The only time he went into a town was to get supplies, and he was very cautious even then, and then he would slip out of town and disappear.
Yeah, they saw a lot of violence and, hatred, and it just, with their families, their neighbors, and it was just, it pushed them to the brink where they were like, okay, we're going to fight back now.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, I would say he was a typical example of a child soldier, and you see that happening all over the world in different places.
Yeah,
even today.
And people, and also too, equating it with today, and people talking about Civil War like, it's a fantasy, but they have no idea the pain and suffering that would be caused from something like a modern-day Civil War. Only a few would want that.
That's true. It's it would be a horrible thing to live through.
What would they do if they were put in those circumstances? Would they just let it happen, or would they, like you said, fight back, there's a lot to say. Yeah. Yeah, especially when they saw the, bloodshed that they saw with their family members.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and people just coming out, and that was just terrible what happened at the farm. And the sad part about it was that from the first book, it seemed like they were on the Union side, but it was Union soldiers and stuff that came down, or people representing the Union, not necessarily sanctioned by the Union Army, that did the damage, that changed them over to the Confederates.
Well, You're
that's
exactly
something
right.
to take into consideration.
That's true. Like Cole Younger and the Younger brothers who fought alongside James' gang, they were Union supporters, and their father was a staunch Union supporter, and Union guerrillas who rode in, like you said, they weren't sanctioned by the government, but they were fighting for that side. They robbed and murdered Cole Younger's brother. So, and that turned Cole Younger and his entire family towards fighting with the Confederate guerrillas. In their the way the bloodshed was on the border areas like that, in a lot of cases, young men were fighting not so much for politics, but just to defend their family and their part of the country, or basically their own property and land.
Yeah.
Well, and to build on what Ramona was just discussing, there was the incident with the Pinkerton security agency that just made the situation worse. So, Dan, could you tell the
that was in the 1870s when the Pinkertons had been chasing Jesse and Frank and the rest of the gang for years. They didn't have a good description of them, but they knew where the mother lived. And it was said that it was claimed at first that they thought Jesse and Frank were in there. Later on, it was found out, there were records found that they were ordered or given permission by the government to just try to destroy the family. They wanted them gone. So they threw a bomb in, and it exploded. It killed Frank and Jesse's 9-year-old half-brother, Archie, and it blew their mother's arm off and damaged their stepfather's hand. It maimed one of his hands permanently. So, I mean, it was bad. They played rough. And the Pinkertons were the same ones. You can find other examples in history where miners would be on strike, and it made some powerful men mad, so they'd have the Pinkertons come in, and they'd drop dynamite in holes that, with miners still down, just blow them up.
Yep. And they also worked for the railroads for the farmers who didn't want to sell land, and the railroads hired them to come to get rid of them.
That's true.
Wild West.
Yes.
Oh my God.
So, in part 2, The Mysterious Life and Faked Death of Jesse James, you and Teresa co-authored that book. You do give us a little bit of Jesse's pattern of how these famous robberies happened. And you give your readers a list of the heists that the records say that they did for about a little over a 10-year period from 1866 to 1876. What can you give us a few examples of how these robberies were conducted?
Oh, like in like the Achabot Bank, Achabot Brothers Bank in Cordon, Iowa. They that one always interested me because there's still secrets about that. But there was a famous politician. It was Henry Clay Dean, and it was called the Copperhead because he lived in the North, but he was a supporter of the South or a Southern sympathizer during the Civil War, Well, he was known. Mark Twain had mentioned him. He had described him as a filthy, dirty man, like kind of like a wharf rat. But he had a voice that was like a spewing volcano, and he was a great orator. And people would come from 50 miles around just to hear him speak in any town he spoke in. And back in those days, 50 miles was a long, hard trip, especially when there were no roads, or the roads that were there were real rough. But Corydon, Iowa, Henry Clay Dean was speaking there, and the whole town was over on one side of the town. And at that same day, the James gang rode into the other side of town, just rode up to the bank, walked in, robbed it, no resistance, and walked out. The whole town was empty. They were all on the other side, including the town sheriff. The James gang, instead of riding off unseen, they rode right up to the crowd and said, "Your bank's been robbed." And people turned around and hushed them and said, like, "Hush, we're listening to a great speech." And they just rode on. And it took the townspeople a little while to figure out they did get robbed. And by then, the James gang was long gone. I always thought that was a funny story.
That was a good one. I love that.
Okay, and Jesse and Frank did get shot in one of the heists. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, Jesse.
Sorry.
In Northfield, Minnesota, I don't believe Jesse was at that robbery. That one, I believe Jesse had split off. And according to Jesse's diary, he was in Texas when that robbery happened. I think the person they mistake. Well, his cousin Wood Height was there, and I think Wood Height was mistaken for Jesse, and that's also the same man whose body was passed off as Jesse a few years later in 1882, or not too long after that. Jesse was in Texas. Frank, and it's kind of interesting because after Frank was shot up, he caught a lot of bullets, one bad one in his knee. Instead of finding a doctor up in Minnesota or in that part of the country, I know he had to get out of that part of the country, the immediate part, but he rode to Nebraska, ended up catching a train, and went all the way down to Waco, Texas, to have the bullet removed there. A man met him, and there were legends that Jesse had taken him to Waco, and then they rode to a ranch outside of Waco, and that is what happened. It wasn't a ranch, it was a farm. But Jesse was in Texas and met him in Waco, got him taken care of at a doctor in town, and then took him out to his farm in Blevins.
Okay. So, and the Minnesota heist that you were just discussing, that was basically the end of the James gang.
Yeah,
Correct.
That's
pretty much.
That was the end of the James gang. All the younger boys were either dead or in prison.
They went to prison.
Okay.
And then there were a couple of other gang members who were killed in that robbery.
Okay.
Yeah, Charlie Pitts.
Well, yeah, that just sounds like a good time to retire, have a change of life after something turned out to be such a disaster. So,
you think?
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, I'm just getting.
I want to know.
So some of the new listeners caught up on the previous couple appearances. So just a few years after Jesse goes into retirement, there is the incident of where the traditional legend has Jesse being killed. So can you tell us a little bit about that? And Teresa, you can talk about the photos you found.
Yeah. So, the story goes that Bob Ford killed Jesse James in April of 1882. And Bob Ford, for the listeners out there, if they're not up to speed on the history of it, Bob Ford was a member of the James Gang. And the purported story is that he was paid by the governor to get Jesse off guard and kill him. That's the story. But as we know, just from our research that we've done, we showed that that's not the truth. Bob Ford didn't kill him. And Jesse moved to Texas and lived out his life to be, I don't remember, 99, was it, Danny, or 97? Lived to be really old.
97 years old.
Yeah. So that's the story. But we have a lot of evidence to prove, like when my mom was doing the research, there was a lot of inconsistencies. They had to do when they got Jesse's body and they were doing I can't think of the word. I just lost it. When they were looking at his body, the autopsy, there were a lot of inconsistencies with his, like, Jesse James, his height, his hair color, scars on his body. There were a lot of inconsistencies proving that it wasn't Jesse James, and we believe it was Wood Height, his cousin, who was put in his place.
Because he had already been killed, huh?
Yes, yeah. Actually, yeah, he was. They found he was. I don't remember all the details. Do you, Danny, about the farm where Wood Height was shot?
Yeah, it was. Wood Height was It was said, according to history, they said Jesse had married his first cousin Z Mills, and Jesse wasn't married to Z. It was Wood Height who was married to Z. But Wood Height was married to her, but he was also a womanizer. Wood Height was involved in kind of as a strange love triangle with Martha Bolton, and Martha Bolton was Bob and Charlie Ford's sister. Wood Height was seeing her, and she was also seeing her farmhand Jim Gibson. Well, Wood and Jim got in a fight. Wood killed Jim, and Wood was running. The way the story went, Wood was running up the stairs, and Bob and Charlie were shooting at him, and he caught a bullet in the back of the head. That's how the bullet was in the back of the head. But anyway, they buried Wood Height in a shallow grave, and that's how the traditional story even claimed Wood Height had died. But no one had ever found any grave for Wood Height. Jim Gibson he disappeared. His body is gone. Nobody knows what happened to it. Then shortly after that, and the ground was too frozen to dig a normal grave, and that's why they allegedly dug a shallow grave. So knowing the ground was frozen, and if you put a body in the shallow grave, it's going to freeze too, and that would have preserved the body. Just shortly after that, they never have an exact date for when that happened. They just said the ground was frozen, and so shortly after that, Jesse supposedly is assassinated in the back of the head from a shot from Bob Ford, sorry, and that was the end of the story. But the problem with that, our late mother, and no pun intended, shot that story full of holes. Nothing added up. Like the Z. Mims, who was allegedly his wife, in the court inquisition, she couldn't remember the age of her own husband, who she'd allegedly have 2 children with. She didn't know his age. She didn't know which finger was missing, if any, on one of his hands. She didn't know much about him at all, but she could describe in great detail every piece of jewelry she'd ever owned. So I thought, well, she had a good memory. People said she was upset and couldn't remember anything. Came to her jewelry, she remembered every little detail. So, and she knew exactly which pieces were missing and which weren't. So I thought that, the claim that her memory was affected by the recent tragedy didn't hold water, because she'd proven that. And then it just went further. There are so many holes in the traditional story of him being killed. Of Jesse being the one who was killed. At the funeral, Jesse's mother was said, well, actually backing up a little bit, after they brought Jesse's mother to St. Joseph, Missouri to identify the body. She walks in the room, looked down at him, and said, "Gentlemen, you're mistaken. That's not my son."
Yeah.
And that wouldn't be the normal reaction of a mother, towards her dead son on the floor. So then she walked outside. She was walked outside by a lady and came back in just sobbing and screaming and cursing them for killing her baby boy. Then at the funeral, a couple of days later on her farm, right in front of her house in the front yard, there were reporters and other people there. She was overheard and quoted as saying, Jesse's aunt said, "That doesn't look like the Jesse I knew." And his mother hushed her and she said, "Shh, that's my rabbit split." And I thought, the whole thing, I mean, there's a lot more behind it than that, but that's just a quick overview of some of the discrepancies in the story of how he was allegedly killed. And it was...
This is a question that I have. Throughout that all, in the first book, you were told how Jesse did get shot during the war in his lungs. And it seems to me they would have looked for those bullet holes, because he was actually shot again later on in life in the same lung.
That's true.
So
Twice
wouldn't
in the right
there have
lung.
been marks or something that they could easily...
Yeah, and
I
most
thought
of
about
those
that
gorillas...
when I was going over the books again yesterday.
Yeah, a lot of the guerrillas who had fought in that war had all been shot. That's true. A lot of the guerrillas who had fought in the Civil War had all been shot up and wounded at different times. I mean, when they're like at Kansas, they were being chased by over 5,000 U.S. cavalry, and it was only roughly, it wasn't even 200 guerrillas. I think it was 180 guerrillas. And they were going up against 5,000 cavalry, and only 1 or 2 of them died. The rest of them made it back, and they killed dozens of cavalry. So instead of running away from them, they would get surrounded, and they would just charge the U.S. cavalry and go right through them. And most people were scared to death of them. So,
wow.
It was really wild. They were all good at what they did, but so they had been, most of them had been wounded at one time or another, just in heavy gunfights. So identifying them by bullet wounds would be real hard to do in some cases. And a lot of them, because they were guerrillas, they would get shot. Nobody knew there were no records of it, so it was believed that one man had been shot in one spot, and he may or may not have been. But,
okay, that makes sense.
But I believe, I don't doubt that they were all shot up in different places throughout a war like that. But
yeah,
like Dan, we just heard a lot about the traditional version. Okay, you, Teresa, and your mom, did, like you say, shoot holes through some of the traditional interpretations of Jesse's life. But in book 3 of your trilogy, you do give us more background with friendships with Billy the Kid that are rooted in that the end of the James gang to the faked death. And yeah, that's one of the interesting aspects of Secret History of the Wild Wild West is all these Wild West outlaws all seem to have known each other. They weren't living all that far apart. That seems to be some new revelations. You talk about Jesse and Billy's biographies were pretty much mirror images of each other. So, what are some of those characters, all these characters doing in that, post 1876 to into the 1880s time period?
Oh, all the different outlaws.
Like,
what were they?
Yeah, how they know each other.
Oh yeah,
collaborating.
Yeah, that's what was real interesting to me.
Mind
There a lot of
blowing.
research. Yeah, there, like Johnny Ringo, for example, he was related to Jesse. And then there were a lot of other, Billy the Kid, for example. The ways they tied in, and then Jesse met Billy the Kid in Las Vegas, New Mexico, in July 1879. I believe it was it. Yeah, and they had, under the guise of creating a new gang. It was after the Northfield, Minnesota debacle or failed robbery, and so they went to. They met in Las Vegas, New Mexico, which another interesting, I'll get on that in a minute. Sorry, I'm trying. There's so many rabbit holes to go down on this. So they had met in Las Vegas, New Mexico, and there's just the connections with different people, the owners of the resort where they were meeting. And it was kind of, I guess in the Old West it would have been considered a resort. It had a saloon, a place to eat. It was a hotel, and they had mineral baths. The whole thing was really interesting to me, not only in the fact that they were meeting two legends of the Old West, but the fact that shortly after that meeting, Jesse tried to fake his death. It didn't work. And then Jesse, just a couple years later in 1882, faked his death. And around that same time period, Billy the Kid allegedly was shot in the back, or shot by his friend Bob, Pat Garrett. And Pat Garrett, by the way, was also a Mason. They'd both been assassinated in similar ways, and it almost made me wonder if they didn't hatch a plan there when they met.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then it just went from there. And then Billy the Kid, for example, the legend of Billy the Kid, the controversy in that camp is that he also came to Texas. He went to Hyco, Texas, which wasn't far from where, it was about a day's ride from where Jesse was living in Blevins, Texas. So they fled, and he also lived to an old age and died of natural causes. If the part about Billy's.
Yeah, and what was interesting, and that Danny pointed out in the book was, Grandpa, Jesse James went under the alias of James L. Courtney, and in his diary, he mentions the William Roberts, and Billy the Kid's alias was Brushy Bill Roberts, so like William Roberts, and that was just another interesting connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what I found amazing was that they were all from different parts of the country, and somehow they all ended up in Texas at some time or another.
And why? Yeah, and it all seemed to be surrounded around like the Waco area.
Yeah.
What was it was like the little hot spot for them, it seemed like, or a safe space, as we all call it today.
Yeah,
true.
like the haven for outlaws or something, instead of going across the border to Mexico like you see a lot of cowboy movies, and everybody heads across the border. But it seems like Texas might have been the border that they were talking about.
It was like,
that's true.
You know how a lot of people say that Australia was formed by a bunch of outlaws? Well, it kind of feels like how Texas was compared to Australia in a sense, because it was seems like a lot of the outlaws migrated to Texas and then became Texas Rangers. Got into politics, and it just reminds me a lot of Australia.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you stop and think about it, the first boatload over here was people emptying the prisons out of England.
Oh, yeah.
And giving them a chance to come over here because they were the first indentured workers.
Yeah.
So it makes sense, but I was just amazed at and for the listeners, man, there are pictures in the books. So you can get a glimpse of what they look like, some of the characters that we're discussing, what they actually look like, photographs. Man, I really love that.
Yeah, like Belle, Starr, and Ramona, you were starting off the show about how all these legends from 130 or 40 years ago still impact us today, and Dylan includes Belle Starr in his song Tombstone Blues.
Yep. I mean, it's just amazing. And also, too, like, we haven't really discussed the treasure yet, but the massive fortunes and the backing and stuff like that, which we get into when we discuss that aspect of the book, is just fascinating because it's almost like following the money trail, going back hundreds of years to today. And it explains why, certain groups, all these people were intertwined and related, governors, outlaws, churches. Yep. Oh, my God. I know it's just that it's all starting to, one, verify things that I used to think about growing up, and two, make me understand, where, who these people are. How do they get into politics and start running everything? Where do they get this money from? And it's just, man, Dan, you have this Pandora's box. I commend you.
Well, thank you. There's been times where Teresa and I were very nervous about writing a lot of that, but and then after our mother passed away, there was we reached a point where we kind of, and to excuse my language, but we thought, to hell with it. Let's just go ahead and do it. And so we thought, well, let's just, put the truth out there, all the research we found, and let's just do it. Shortly after Mom died, we were sad about that, and we vowed to carry on her work. And so we went ahead and just went for it. We had been warned in the past by some people not to write certain things.
I bet.
Yeah. And that was interesting.
Yeah,
but,
and I thought about that too when I was I said, heck, oh my God, you put it out there. And here's the thing. It's like you connected those three factions of our world here.
That's true.
The church, the
Mm-hmm.
outlaws, the corruptness, the outlaws, and their affiliation, and the government, the political side.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes back hundreds of years.
Oh, yeah.
It does.
And it's still
it ties in with religion.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it goes real deep. Real deep in that rabbit hole.
Yes, I can't wait for the movie. We need to tell Joey Medea to write the screenplay and get this. Because I'm waiting for the movie
And there are
or the series.
when Danny, when Mom and Danny were going way back when Mom was writing her books, they would go to the libraries and they were doing research. And somehow it's like certain people kind of knew they were going to be there. And
yeah, we were followed, and it was the same two
yeah,
men
they
every
were
time.
followed. Yeah.
And
And
they
the
finally came
librarian
up
guys.
and they introduced themselves. One man was an older gentleman, and he was a former cop from Dallas. He was about 2 blocks away from the story he told us from JFK when JFK was assassinated. And he was real big into that. And then the other man was younger, and he worked for the State Bar of Texas. I'm not going to say his name. He claimed he did. But before he said that was a second meeting when he told us that. The first meeting he told us he was a house painter. And I never thought anything of it. He was dressed in, just normal average jeans and a shirt. And then I'll get back to that in a minute, the house painter thing. But then the second time we met him, he gave us his card. He was a researcher for the State Bar of Texas. And I looked him up online, and a few years later, you can't find any trace of him ever having worked there. That's what bothered me, because I found him on their website, and then a few years later, there's nothing. So, and they warned us not to say certain things tying in with politics. And so, the way they worded it was, don't mention anything dealing with the Texas power structure. And Mom and I said, we looked at them and said, well, who's the Texas power structure? We didn't know. And we were so naive at the time. And they just laughed and said, you'll find out. And that was, we saw them a few more times, and then just kept time we would show up, they were there. And the librarian at the archives, he told my mother and I not to sign our names when we walked in. Don't register by signing your names. And Mom said, why? And he said, they're watching. And I thought, this sounds like a crazy movie. And I thought maybe he's
tearing stuff up in front of y'all. Remember, Danny?
Yeah, I said, who's watching? And he just walked away real quick. So I thought, okay, this is really weird. And then shortly after that, we met the two men.
But even while y'all were talking to them, they were just taking documents and stuff from the library.
Oh yeah, they were taking microfiche rolls, and they would just take the rolls. But when I'm going back to the house painter job, he said at first, years later, and this was just a couple of years ago, what was that mafia movie that came out with Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci recently?
Goodfellas.
About Hoffa, Jimmy Hoffa.
Yeah.
When the hitman would introduce himself in that movie, he said, "I hear you paint houses," and the hitman said, "I do," and that was code for killing. You paint the walls red when you shoot them, that kind of thing. And I thought, wow, I wonder if that's what he meant. So it gave me chills when I saw the movie. I thought, wow, we've had someone tell us something very similar. But then another group I'll never mention has basically gave us the okay to say what we did.
Yeah. But I imagine there's so much more. I found myself doing was, like at the section where there's the list of all the names and stuff like that who were considered sympathizers and stuff like that. I was looking for familiar names now that I could say, okay, yeah, that one.
But
I mean,
it is literally interesting. When I wrote the treasure book, it was like doing a family tree for an organization. And then later on the third book, it's a family tree of the people in the organization. A lot of them are related. And that just blew my mind. And I remember I showed Mom. She saw the list that, all the names, and she said, how in the world did you find that? And I said, just a lot of research. It just amazed her that I told her there was a point, it was always hard, but there was a point where you find a couple of key names and it all just unfolded, kind of just unfolded right before them.
Right. Because it's going to make me go and look at my family tree on my other side to see if I see any familiar names. Because 30% of me comes from England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland.
All right. You may very well find. We may be related.
Yeah, because my first ancestor on that side, the non-melanin side, actually landed in 1634.
Wow.
Yeah.
It goes way back.
Yeah.
It's amazing what you can find, It really is. Yeah. And what you can't find but somehow uncover.
Yeah, but I mean, I found myself getting a little scared for you because I said, well, wait a minute, this goes so deep, and there were other questions that I had because after reading and rereading the book, I'm telling you, listeners, you need to read this book. I wanted to know that, when you got to the Freemason of it and the secret societies, it seems to me the ultimate goal of the people who came over here and their ideas of what the new land would be like was all about freedom and liberty, except for the fact that in the end, they may have started out that way, but then we've come to the point where they've become the people that they were fleeing from and trying to...
That seems to happen a lot in history and in families. People who flee an abusive spouse and then, or a kid who gets bullied and then they become a bully.
Yes. I said, wow.
Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, well, also, I was just, a lot of the groups, and I wondered that the same thing you're mentioning, that with all the fighting and infighting, and when you've got two sides and many of those sides are hidden, vying for power over the new land. I mean, the Catholic Church on one side and then the people who were fleeing them on the other, and that several centuries of that struggle, I think a lot of good intentions end up falling to the side in the name of safety or security.
Yeah. And power.
And power, especially power. And power, even with the best intentions, if somebody gets a little too much power, it seems that it can turn a person real quick, or a group of people.
Right. It turns to greed, and they lose their compassion, because it starts. The idea was wonderful, but then you have to think, this freedom and liberty to live this enlightened life, and amassing all of this fortunes and stuff like that. Man is fallible,
That's true.
and they turn. They cannot really accept power. It changes them.
That's true.
And they really became what they were fleeing when they got here.
That's true. I think that also causes, that also reminds churches. If you have a church, a congregation, somebody disagrees with someone, the church splits. So then you've got two different ones.
Yep.
With tensions between the two. And then the same thing keeps happening. Years later, it's multiple churches that grew from that one, but they all have completely different identities. And they struggle for, in a way, they fight for a big, for each other's congregations.
Right.
Dan, speaking of churches, in your first book, Jesse James and the Lost Templar Treasure, chapter on the Bruton Parish Church. It's subtitled America's Roslyn Chapel. And, if people like the Oak Island type of action-adventure, hidden treasure type stories, this church in Williamsburg, Virginia, is very comparable to Oak Island. That seemed to have something mysterious. That doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. Just something we really don't quite understand. But it's an extension of Francis Bacon's The New Atlantis book, and you do reference that book throughout. I think all your trilogy. What was Bacon writing about in The New Atlantis that seems like it's something that people would want? It's an enviable mindset.
Yeah, that's true. Kind of like a utopian society in a way, where they ruled themselves. They had their beliefs, but they lived in peace. And they just they settled their disputes in a peaceable manner. They were free, and that's what appealed to that book so much, especially in the time, or from those who read it. In a way, I personally believe his book was a template for what America was meant to be. They were running, learned minds across Europe, especially back in those days. They they had many of them, the alchemists, Rosicrucians, and other groups. They had a great desire to find some place where they could live peaceably and practice their own beliefs the way they wished. And
Right.
I think that's what really appealed to people. I think that's what the book was basically trying to blueprint. And it may not have been his own idea, but a culmination of different ideas of people in his circle, where they just put all those ideas into one template, and then he wrote it. That's my gut feeling on that. And I know Marie Bauer Hall, Manly Palmer Hall, who was another famous 33rd degree Mason, his wife, Marie Bauer Hall, had used the writings of Bacon and also in Shakespeare she decoded ciphers dealing with the treasure at Bruton Parish Church. And she was going to dig for it, and they stopped her and just basically told her, don't come back to town. They threatened her with jail time. And so that told me she was on. And what family bought up most of colonial Williamsburg? Everything except for the church itself was purchased by the Rockefellers in the name of restoring the town.
Wow.
Yeah, big money. And from other books I'd read about Marie Bauer Hall and that topic, the Rockefellers they don't own the church, but they control the board of the church. So what they say goes, that kind of thing.
Wow.
So what seems to be the mystery in Williamsburg you're saying the underground vault of the church is 20 feet below the original foundations. This is one of the earliest American churches. Okay, she's asked, hey, don't dig here. You're not allowed back on the property. What secrets could have been kept there?
According to Marie Bauer Hall, and I don't disagree with her, she said there were treasures, as your typical treasures with gold and silver and things of that nature, but there were also treasures of knowledge that would shake the foundations of our understanding of history and possibly even religion. According to her, it was the information hidden in that vault is supposed to basically change the world if allowed to get out to the world. And I think there's groups who, I know there would be groups who wouldn't want something like that out there because it doesn't fit their timeline or it would affect their power or something. But I would love to know what's in it. I love answers.
Yeah. Wow.
So, when Barbara and I done these shows over the years, and you get the people talking about the Masons or part of the New World Order type thing. You also have people Rob Sullivan tell you that it's about nation and character building. What ideas could have come to America that are presenting America was a place of refuge at the beginning, and it just I don't know, maybe became something else. But you can go back. I'm sure the listeners are very familiar with people, the guests who presented both sides of the coin.
Mm-hmm. I'm kind of lost on the question there. I'm not sure.
Like you believe that they are wanting to, it's not like a deep conspiracy, like all these people have this new world order, like they're trying to, it's like they're shaping the future. They have a plan to shape the future. It's not nefarious like a lot of people try to put out there that it's.
Right.
That's true.
Right.
It could be. I mean, I know the people who they would just change their plans as they go. I think a lot of the plans from way back with Bacon and even before his time would probably be enacted. The core of the plan is there. It's just they would have to change tactics in some at different times throughout history. Just as technology advances in other aspects, there's got to be things that people didn't account for, so they have to be a little fluid, but keep the core of the plan rigid, if that makes sense. I don't think it would be a bad plan. I think, in my opinion, like Freemasonry, for example, I believe Freemasonry was fighting the people, like Francis Bacon is considered the father of modern-day Freemasonry by many people. And many Freemasons also, but I think their ultimate goal was for humanity to be at peace and not constantly trying to destroy one another. I also think that the same thing exists in certain religions, but there's always somebody who gets in power, like different popes in the past. And when we know the history of the Catholic Church, I'm sure every organization has a bad part of their history that they'd rather not talk about. But I think overall the core plan is probably still in place. It's just several factions fighting for their own idea of what they think it should be.
Yep.
And it's kind of like the battle is usually peaceful, but at times in history it pops up and it goes to live fire, kind of like the Cold War between the U.S. and the Soviets, two completely different ideologies. And at the Cold War, it would pop up in smaller countries as hot spots and live fighting, but the two big boys stayed, haven't gone at it yet.
Right.
And that kind of ties in with modern history now. I mean, with Ukraine and all that trouble.
Yeah.
And it's sad because the weaker countries, just like in weaker people, and not so much weak people, but people who aren't as advanced with something or don't have the power, they end up getting the brunt of those fights or catching all the problems, if that makes sense.
Okay, well,
it does.
So in your first book, you have include a 1775 painting of the Bruton Church. Then about 250 years earlier, you include a reproduction of Porte Lucius.
Oh yeah, 1516, published in 1516.
Yeah. So when we look at this artwork, it's still the New Atlantis is about was published about halfway between both of those artworks. Is there some kind of timing, with the dates, what does the artwork reveal about some kind of something hidden? What was your reason for incorporating all this artwork into?
Okay.
Yeah, that's from Lost Templar, your first book.
Yeah, the first thing that caught my eye, well, what got me to that point was when I was trying to do a tree, like an organizational tree, which is, in my opinion, like a family tree just applied to an organization. Mm-hmm. When I was trying to figure out whose idea was this in the beginning, where did it come from, who came up with all, there was a million questions, and I kept going back. I remember when I traced it to Sir Francis Bacon, I thought, finally, I've reached the end. This is the guy who started it all. And then a few days later, I found out that I was wrong. He wasn't the guy who started it all, and the trail kept going. It went through John Dee, his mentor, who was the original 007. That was the alchemical signature he would sign on some of his letters to the Queen, looked like 2 zeros and a 7. And it went back through different Jewish rabbis, Kabbalists, alchemists, all these different people. When it came to the rabbis, it's what got me in acquainted with Lucis. I thought, that's odd, because I remember watching Scott Wolter's show, The Hooked X. Or America Unearthed was his show, and he would mention his book, The Hooked X, a lot. On the cover of that, there's, and I referenced him in my first book, there was a hooked X. Right, the man sitting on a chair in the shape of an X, and the dagger on his side it makes the hook. And I thought, okay, that's odd. So I got to looking at I looked at the cover photo closer, and just started noticing all the symbols. The Tree of Life was, it sticks out fairly. It's obvious. He's dressed for traveling. There's the veil template or a shape of it on part of his shawl, and he's pointing at the floor. And I thought, that looks interesting. The shadow looks more like waves or water where he's pointing. His feet are on one side, there's the water, and on the other side, I just had a hunch. I thought, that kind of looks familiar. So I found a map from around the same time, and 1516, it was a world map around that same period, and I laid it over that. It matched the Western world, or the New World, the outlines on the tiles of the floor. And I thought, okay, so he's pointing. He's probably in Europe, and he's pointing to to the water. He's facing the west, and he's holding the Tree of Life. It's almost like it's being moved from one place to another. And that's what I thought. Could this be all of that in one, cover on a book from 1516? It just amazed me. And I got it. The more I researched, the more it seemed to back up my thoughts on that. They moved the treasure and buried it. One of the templates was the shape of the Tree of Life, and it not only was the used as a template, I believe it also had a lot of mystical or religious significance in the shape. Well, I know they did, in the shape of the templates. And I think I've often wondered, of course I don't have proof for this, but the fact that they buried the treasures in those templates that were shaped by those designs may have been their way of invoking a blessing from God on the new world for them to prosper. I hope I didn't go down too deep a rabbit hole.
Our listeners love this kind of stuff, and as I said, we've had.
It reminds me. Yeah. Sorry, Mark. I didn't interrupt you.
No. I was just gonna say, we've had guests saying, our group is a lot of good guys, just trying to benefit mankind, and other people, said something opposites, and that show kind of disappeared from the archives. But that was one of Barbara's shows.
Oh, wow.
I hadn't, but but I think what is, I think a lot of our listeners just like to tune in and get information, like what Dan was talking about, moving knowledge from the old world to what looks like the East Coast of America, represented in those the tiles on the floor.
Mm-hmm. It was, well, and also the hash marks on the background. And I just happened, I was taking a break, and while I was researching Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah, I came across that. At the time, it was a new video by Victoria Hanna, and it was the Alice Bet song. And in that, they were drawing little hash marks on a chalkboard, which was representative of rain. And I found out the hash marks representing rain is representative of a blessing, fell in line with the rest of the thing. They were all just the treasures, and also the fleeing of certain people from the old world to the new world, looking for new hope and, prosperity.
Yeah. You have Verrazano's traced route to and from the East Coast, which was just a few years after the Porte Lucas map. You have the Arcadian Shepherds paint. Bill Mann has been again. You've spoken with him. He's gone into detail about the importance of all the colors and the clues in the distant background.
Mm-hmm.
And people keep going back to Poussin's painting, but there's throughout your three books, you're drawing from a lot of known artwork from the last 500 years.
That's true. Cassini, yes. Cassini's Celestial Globe, I think it was a 1792. When you were mentioning that brought that up. And, it just amazed me also on how the constellations at the time, the way they mapped them, they used that, and it signified, that goes on and on. That's like, Orpheus, the lyre of Orpheus, and then Hercules, and that ties in. Everything on that ties in with the Poussin painting Et in Arcadia Ego, and I believe that's what they were pointing at. I don't think it was pointing to. I think that's what it was pointing to, that the treasures were moved to the new world, and it just that blows my mind. It still does. The fact that all that came to light in just a short time. It was amazing, and relatively short in the span of things. It took 25 years, but it seems like it was just yesterday.
Yeah, and you're also including the floor plans of the Dome of the Rock.
Mm-hmm.
As just kind of looking at how you progressed or developed as an author over the trilogy. You have a lot of really interesting information, artwork, interpretations of just say the Dome of the Rock and the Shepherds of Arcadia painting to the the research you did in part 3, where think that the caption is a Cointreau reunion that President Truman was said to have attended along with Jesse James.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think you're looking at just incorporating so many different aspects of artwork and research and this providing links to Jesse James and President Truman. Well, we haven't gotten into Bonnie and Clyde yet, but
Yeah.
It's
that was a trip.
yeah, you've linked all these different events and ideas and people throughout your trilogy. I don't know if there's a question in there. I'm just like rambling about.
Well, yeah, that amazes me too. When we found and I remember when stuff like that would come to our realization years ago, how just mind-blowing there's so many mind-blowing parts of this whole story. It's amazing. And then you get to a point where nothing really shocks you anymore. And sometimes I miss being shocked, but at the same time, it's that you I guess you can only be shocked so many times, and you finally, it stops amazing me. It just leads me on. What's the next clue? What's the next answer? You never stop.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because I was thinking the same thing, especially like Mark said, when, Bonnie and Clyde. I mean, I'm like, okay, who else are we going to uncover in this puzzle? Because it's so. Here's the thing. You've done such massive research, and that's what I love, I don't doubt anything in this book. And what I'm thinking is that how coincidental is it that the infamous in our country ends up in the little web, and the little web spreads across this nation. This is not only the history of the James family, but it is the history of our nation. And I'm just like, holy cow.
And you said it perfect.
Yeah.
It's like a little web, and every time you peel back one web, there's more webs, and it just keeps going.
Well, it reminds me of that scene in the JFK Oliver Stone movie when Joe Pesci, he says it's a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma, and it really is. That's what this story. My mom just started. She just, she heard the stories of Jesse James her entire life, that was her grandfather, that he didn't die. And that's all she wanted to find out, was to prove. And then it led to all this crazy. I mean, all this, it just me and Danny, we just kind of scratch our heads still. Like, we never dreamed just that her wanting to prove he was Jesse James, what it would lead to. And it really is like that scene where Joe Pesci says that. It is like a riddle wrapped up in an enigma.
Mm-hmm. It's a good,
and there's just
good
so
analogy.
much more. Yes, and there's this, and that's really how our life, like, has been for the past, since we started this journey with our mom. And that scene resonates with me because that's exactly how it feels. It's just, it's mind-boggling. And then there's still so much more to uncover.
Yes, yes. And I like in the newest book, The Secret History of the Wild Wild West, it says, you say, even Oscar Wilde noticed the fact that Americans tend to elevate criminals to legendary heroes, so to speak. But then you don't know who the outlaws and stuff are compared to whose big names are who are
the outlaws and who are the,
Exactly. Exactly.
And do we really want to know? That's the scary thing.
I don't know, because I'm like, I put down, I caught the fact that and I've known that all along, that like even the Texas Rangers, what you pointed out there, it's like, to me, policing of today, because we have good ones, and then we have those other ones. And it's just like, what has changed? And then, and then I wanted to ask, while I have the chance, is I never saw addressed in the book, but see, when Jesse took on that persona of, it was his cousin, right? His new name? He took on the name of a Union soldier.
Oh, yes.
And he settled in a Confederate area without any problem. So I started thinking, I said, well, maybe they knew. Maybe they knew.
Yeah.
Because even you said Erastus Andrus would not even speak to his own brother for years and years, simply because he was a Union soldier.
That's true.
Jesse was taking on the persona of that in the midst of the Confederate state and area, and yet he made a life and everything amongst. They had to have known who he was in their circle, because he didn't hang just with any circle.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
because
and that's
of his father-in-law and stuff. These were prominent type people. And it lends me to wonder, if they knew, did they use that to get part of his fortune, or to gain his help, or to even use him to help them get where they wanted to? Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, it does definitely make sense. Yep.
Because I really wonder.
It was like a perfectly executed plan, it seemed like.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that was so long ago, and yet we see it unfolding before our eyes now.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The whole everything about it.
Yeah, it's like history repeating itself.
Yes. Or continuing.
Yeah.
Continuing. God, this was an amazing book, Dan and Teresa. Wow.
I was thinking to credit, but Danny did all this last one, and it was just, he really did an amazing job. I'm impressed with it. It's just like, I I don't think he said he wished he could have done better on it when we were talking earlier. I said, I don't think you could have. This was just, it's just an exceptional work. He did an amazing job.
Yeah, because like I said, anything that can
I think
fit
so.
me and keep me in that one spot, I never got up from my chair.
Yeah.
That makes me happy. Thank you.
I'm so serious. This, oh my God.
Yeah.
When's the next one coming?
Yeah, is there a part 4?
Oh, not that I know of, unless
The treasure is recovered.
Yeah.
That would be nice. That'd be real nice.
Yeah, I think they've already found it.
Yeah, I think most of it. I don't think it's all been recovered, but I think most of it has, and those that haven't are probably heavily watched.
Yeah. Well, the government went and got it.
Yeah. And then there's smaller ones out there, and a small one. I mean, even if you found a half of mason jar full of gold coins would be enough to make you pretty comfortable.
I just want to know where to start looking. I find it interesting that, it was all around here. None of it seems to have left the country, like in places in Mexico where the outlaws used to run off to. I was thinking maybe some of it's there. And then there's nothing up in Canada per se, because they traveled so much ground on horseback.
True. They did.
And carrying all that stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
And all the building that has gone on, there's very few places that is left untouched.
I have noticed. Actually, I've noticed in the last 10, 15 years, even before Mom passed, which I would point it out to her. I said, "Do you see this point? It's on the map, and if you look at that property." When they first started developing that property that used to be out in the country, now it's covered with a subdivision, the very first place they started digging under the guise of development was right on the point where the map shows there's a treasure. So I found that very interesting. And then that started happening all around different parts, like in Central Texas and places, and other areas, even just other states too. It was anytime there was a development, there was either a development and the digging started right on that spot where the map said it should be, or it would be a rock quarry or a sand quarry, stuff like. And I thought, what better way to cover that up than to use heavy digging equipment? You're a quarry. Who's going to question that? And that's all the equipment you would need to recover it and transport it.
And not only
Dump
that, I
trucks
was thinking that they started finding stuff, and then I forget what president it was that had passed the laws that, when you bought land, you can no longer own the mineral rights in it. Because I think, that has, that was awfully suspicious. Now that I've read the book, and then I think back about that, where it used to be you can go buy land, and if you found gold or silver or whatever on that land, it was yours. And then they cut that out around, I think, maybe 1912.
That was the Antiquities Act. And the Antiquities Act was pushed through by LBJ.
Oh.
And he was tied in with, he's got a lot of connections to the treasure that was recovered in Victoria Peak in New Mexico.
Okay, so
yeah.
Let's work in President Johnson and Victoria Peak. for get the listeners intrigued by that connection.
Oh, wait, I'm mistaken. It wasn't that Johnson. The Antiquities Act started in 1906.
Right.
Oh.
So, yeah, I was
Was
mistaken
that Roosevelt?
Yeah, well, it was,
Teddy
sometime.
Roosevelt.
Yeah. So there's that. But, yeah, LBJ and Victoria Peak, it's said by, of course, there's no known official documents tying him in other than news reports. And, in the Watergate hearings, they also mentioned, and that is an official document that would tie him, in the Watergate hearings, they mentioned Victoria Peak in the treasure, just a little quick mention of it. And I thought that's interesting, and that was dealing with Nixon. So I thought that was very interesting. If it didn't exist, and the government likes to claim, if there's a large treasure, of course they're going to say, no, nothing here, nothing to see here, move along. But yet in the Watergate hearings, they mentioned that treasure. Yep. And several, like the Attorney General for the state of New Mexico had mentioned the treasure. And also Wagner Carr, who was a former Attorney General here in Texas.
And he was involved with the
Warren Commission.
Warren Commission, yeah.
And also, he's
Billy
the same.
Saul.
Yeah, well, Billy Saul Estes. That's where Billy Saul ties in with him and LBJ. And we were at an exhumation of a grave in Granbury, Texas. And it was one of the guys who claimed he was Jesse James, and he was debunked. He was just a hoaxer. He knew about treasures, but he wasn't Jesse. That was the guy who was J. Frank Dalton was his name. Well, they thought they were exhuming, or they claimed they were exhuming his grave. And Billy Saul Estes and Wagner Carr were both there. They claimed they didn't know one another, yet I saw them back in the corner of the cemetery under an old tree in the shade, just talking and having a great time. And they talked for about 20 minutes. And then a lot of reporters started showing up to the exhumation, and they got away from one another.
And the interesting thing was, also, the other interesting thing was at that exhumation, when Billy Saul made his entrance into the cemetery, all these, like, the minute he got there, he came directly to my mom and wanted to shake her hand, which blew her away because, she was like, wow, what's this all about?
He had a copy of her book. Yeah, he had a copy of her book, and he asked her to sign the book for him.
Yeah.
Or he wanted her phone number. So she signed the book and gave him her phone number.
Yeah.
Wow.
He was something. He was very polite. In person, he was very polite. But I know his history. He was alleged to have killed quite a few people to protect LBJ from protecting LBJ from being tied to a lot of I guess illicit money schemes.
God, this book is man.
Yeah, it just seems to be layers and layers of stuff. Like, it can be mind-boggling and overwhelming at times.
My literary agent also, when she saw I wrote a synopsis of the book for her before we went for getting it published, and she told me she said on this one you might want to be careful.
Yeah.
I told her I've been careful, so there's things I didn't want to mention, and it would get too. It would also, if I had mentioned, it could have taken away from the whole point of the book anyway. So I left quite a bit out.
I bet.
And that's not going in a fourth book.
No.
But one of the interesting aspects of books 2 and 3 is you incorporate in part 2 Jesse's diaries, in part 3 many of the different members of the James gang, or the associates, business partners. You provide, give the readers a lot more information about all the people associated with Jesse. What is there any? Is there any leftover information for a fourth book that we don't know? You haven't been able to present to us yet?
No, I'm not going to write a fourth book. I think that would be for somebody else. Somebody else not on this topic anyway. There's enough for a few articles, but I'm not going to write some, like I mentioned a minute ago, there's some things I probably should never say. But, those things wouldn't help the story along. It would just be they're interesting, but it would just be more dirt on some people, and I don't want to get any, I guess, put it in the movie. But I do plan on. It's got to be a movie. It's got to be a movie. I agree. Well, I hope that happens.
Well, you have all these Hollywood connections now. So when can people see you on Gay TV?
Open Minds with Regina Meredith, and that's on their website now. That made me happy. I just and I asked her. I said she's personal friends. Regina Meredith is personal friends with Robert Duvall, and I asked her, please show him my book. I don't know if she will, but she said they sit on the couch and watch movies sometimes, and he tells her how movies were made, talks about the filming and things like that. I thought that would be an interesting conversation also. But if I told her, if you know anybody who's interested, feel free to let them, give them a copy of the book or ask me, and I'll send it to them.
Well,
I would love to have a movie.
Yeah, well, all of us can co-host if you get Robert Duvall, and we can just talk about his appearance on the miniature of the Twilight Zone and his Godfather movies.
Yeah. Oh, and those are actually the three Godfather movies are some of my favorites.
It's an amazing trilogy.
Yeah. It seems like a lot of the people who were in that are like just recently are dying off, it seems like.
Yeah, James Caan.
James Caan. He just recently died.
Yeah, and the movie came out like 50 years ago, though.
Yeah.
So most everyone's at least approaching 80.
Yeah.
Real close to it.
I think Robert's about 90. Yeah, he's just wonderful as Tom Hagen is kind of being the outsider, but he, to the family, you always want to be part of the family, and he did a good job. Still made a few mistakes. It's a really he plays a really fascinating character.
That's true. He does.
Yeah, he's amazing. He's a great actor. He had me in Lonesome Dove as Gus, so ever since then he had my heart. So.
Well, I think that should be the next project is working on the screenplay. and then pitching it to Netflix or something as a series. Because
that sounds like a great idea to me.
I don't want it to end. I don't. I want to know, okay, so where do we go now?
Oh, yeah.
No, I think Ramona's right about calling Joey.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
I think Hollywood needs a new Kubrick.
Oh,
Yeah.
gosh, yes. Yes.
Yep.
I don't know.
Where can they find your books? Tell the people where they can get these books.
Okay. Our publisher is Inner Traditions at innertraditions.com. You can also find them on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and anywhere books are sold. In most countries on the planet.
Cool. Yeah.
Okay.
Probably not North Korea though. So.
You never know. He might be your biggest fan. You never know.
Maybe. He might be.
Ramona, what are you gearing up for another show soon?
I don't know. As soon as my workshop is over, I'm doing a workshop for the Hoodoo Festival. I'll be teaching a workshop on herbs and healing, and I finally got all my stuff in, and that's in August. And I think the last part of August, 1st of September, I'm going to start back, come off of hiatus, and Ramona Speaks the Other Truth will be back in business.
Okay. And we're down to about the last minute or so, and I just wanted being here. It was a great show. I think you provided the listeners with a lot of new insights, and we had a lot of fun tonight. And thanks, Barbara, for producing the show. And we'll see everyone next week. Thank you so much, and thanks to Ashley and Inner Traditions for making all this happen. So we will see everyone next week. Thank you so much.